Good morning. It's 10 o'clock on the dot, and we have a webinar chock full of information with the latest from the SBA on the PPP second draw. So we're pleased to bring you this information this morning. My name is Veronica Birch Flores. I have the pleasure and honor to serve as the Chief Operating Officer for First National Bank of South Miami. And as a community banker for more than 40 years, I can honestly say that I have never seen such a long period of such a difficult time emotionally, physically, in our economy, with the worst still yet to come, more than likely. So it has been a trying time, and we here at First National Bank have worked very hard to try and bring you stability and security and service during these times, to bring you the latest information and hopefully provide great counsel to you during these times of how to navigate and pull your business through. So on Friday afternoon, we had, of course, planned this webinar to be on Wednesday. And on Friday afternoon, we were notified by the SBA that the portal was going to be open at 9 a.m. today. Unfortunately, even at the time, even we were checking all through Friday evening, Saturday night, Sunday, finally late Sunday night, they released the application for the second draw. So Angel is going to go through the program and talk a little bit about the forgiveness and how the new law that was signed on December 27th also impacts the first round of PPP. I think most of you that have joined us today were recipients of the first round of PPP at First National. We were proud to have brought this to over 500 companies in our community. We lent over $80 million, and it translated to more than 8,000 jobs that were saved as a result of our efforts. So we look forward to continuing to provide this business saving, life saving funding in hopes of forgiveness through the generosity of the taxpayers. But it's been a tough time, and the businesses certainly need help. Angel is going to talk about all the enhancements that were done to help businesses even further, and how some businesses are going to have some enhanced benefits as well because they were particularly hard hit by the pandemic and continue to be. When this started in March, the anticipation was this might be a 2-month period. And here we are approaching a year since COVID had come to our country. And still, with a vaccine, we know there's much more suffering to come, both in our personal lives and in our business lives. So I do want to remind you, there is a Q&A, regardless of the device you're on. There is a Q&A, so please feel free. We already have 4 questions posed there. At the end of today's webinar, we will be getting to those questions and answer them to the best of Angel's ability. So if you have any questions, then please feel free to post them there, and we will address those at the end. So I, of course, want to thank Patrick, who has joined us today, and he is our senior commercial real estate loan officer at the bank, and he has been very instrumental. He is the liaison for all of our, we call them first responders here, our lenders who have been working on the program. So even though technically we only have 8 lenders in the bank for PPP, we had 18 people working on lending for PPP. So we enlisted the help of our private bankers and our branch managers because the need is that great. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you my very good friend, my co-pilot in all of this, and our subject matter expert on all things PPP. And I know many of you have had conversations with Angel and have exchanged many emails as you navigate through the program. And Angel has probably slept 2 hours a night for the last 10 days as he has scoured this bill to really understand it and bring you some very important information. So with that, I bring to you our Executive Vice President Extraordinaire and our Director of Private Client Services and our PPP expert, Angel Medina. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As we did with the first Paycheck Protection Program, we really understood the difficulty that you're facing in your business. And if you're here today, it's because you continue to face that and have suffered some reductions in revenues during 2020. And we're hopeful that through our hard work and partnership with you, that we can help you by facilitating the Paycheck Protection Program second draw. And my goal today is to walk you through what that program means to you and how you can potentially qualify for it. So let's begin with an understanding that the actual name of this second draw is called the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act. And it was signed by the president into law on December 27th. And as required by the act, the SBA issued its final rule on January 6th of 2021. Essentially what it does is it restarts the Paycheck Protection Program. At this point, we're at almost $800 billion in Paycheck Protection Program allocations through all of the different components, starting with the first one in March of this past year. It provides greater flexibility in how you're able to use the PPP dollars, both PPP 1 and PPP second draw. It expands the allowable and forgivable expenses. And most importantly, for a lot of you out there that got the first PPP under $150,000, it provides for a simplified forgiveness process for those loans. So as I mentioned, the Act appropriates $325 billion, $285 billion of which went for both the second draw PPP and PPP phase 1, which I'll get to in a second, but essentially you'll be able to apply for it if you did not apply for it originally. It also provides an additional $20 billion to the SBA to disperse through its Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It provides $15 billion in grants for shuttered live venues, theaters, museums, and zoos. It provides $3.5 billion for debt relief under the SBA's 7(a) program, and it provides another $2 billion to the SBA for certain lending enhancements. So the second draw, you'll remember that in PPP originally, the availability for applying for those loans ended on August 8th. Well, it reopened as of today and will now have a close on March 31. Who is eligible? Well, if you didn't previously apply for the PPP, you can apply now. If you applied and returned the funds and now you feel that you need them, you can reapply as well. You can not reapply if you've already received forgiveness for your first PPP loan. This part of the PPP Act expands the covered expenses to include those new expenses in the PPP second draw. And I'll share that with you in a minute. But a caution here, there's some misunderstanding, and I want to clarify that if you had not applied for PPP and you're going to apply for PPP for the first time, now you can't apply for the PPP second draw. But if you already have PPP, then you can apply for the PPP second draw. So let's talk about the second draw. First of all, it allows businesses that received the original PPP, and very importantly here, that you have used those funds or you will have used those funds by the time you get funded this second draw, up to an additional $2 million. As I mentioned on the PPP, this one also expands the allowable and forgivable uses of PPP funds, simplifies the forgiveness process for loans under 150,000, and it provides greater flexibility for how you compute your covered period. Remember that in both phases both phases of the original PPP, your covered period was either 8 weeks or 24 weeks, or you had the option to pick 8 or 24 weeks. Well, now they've provided you some better flexibility, minimum 8 weeks, maximum 24. But if it was beneficial to you and you could use the monies in 12 weeks or 14 weeks, you can pick that as well. So one of the conditions, or two of the conditions, is one, that you must demonstrate, like you did for the original PPP, that you were in operation, in other words, doing business as of February 15th, 2020, and that you may not be permanently closed. In other words, your business can be temporarily closed, but you cannot have permanently shut down your business. So it's very important to demonstrate or represent that your business will continue after this funding. So who's eligible? Well, the same people that were eligible, the same businesses that were eligible for PPP are eligible for PPP second draw. And those are business concerns, not-for-profits, housing cooperative, etc., sole proprietors, independent contractors. You must be able to demonstrate or certify that you have no more than 300 employees and that you have suffered a 25% reduction in gross revenues between comparable periods in 2019 and 2020. What this essentially means is that you compare quarter to quarter. So you compare quarter 2 2020 to quarter 2 2019, quarter 3 2020 to quarter 3 2019, or quarter 4. Right. The other way you can do it is if during all of 2020, you had a 25% decline in revenues over all of 2019, and your financial statements can demonstrate that, you will be able to use that as well. And that you have fully used your PPP loan funds and that you were in business as of February 15th. It did also expand eligibility for certain businesses, in particular, trade organization, chambers of commerce, not-for-profits that engage in destination or tourism marketing. Also expanded to allow for certain local newspapers, television, and radio stations to qualify for both PPP and PPP second draw if they got PPP 1, as long as they don't have any more than 300 employees and that less than 15% of both their revenues and activities were in lobbying activities. So if they were spending more than 15% on lobbying activities, or spent more than 50% of their time on lobbying activities, they are ineligible. Who's not ineligible? You remember that there was a list of entities that specifically were not eligible for PPP. Obviously, if you have PPP, you're eligible for PPP second draw. Publicly traded companies are not eligible. Any business that spends more than 15% of its time or resources in political or lobbying activities, if the business is legally organized in the People's Republic of China or the administrative region of Hong Kong, if you have a board member who's a resident of the People's Republic of China, any person registered as a foreign agent, or if you received a grant under the shuttered venues provision of this act. And at the end of my presentation, I am going to briefly talk about the shuttered venue provision. Essentially, if you get the shuttered venue provision, you cannot get the PPP second draw. And I think we have at least one client that fits that description. The amount of the PPP second draw, how is that computed? Well, it's very simple. The same way that we computed it for PPP1, and that was that the average monthly payroll cost based on either calendar year 2019 or calendar year 2020. In other words, remember, it's a 12-month period that you have to calculate what the average monthly payroll costs were for your business, or $2 million, whichever is lower. So this one, instead of 10 million, it now sets a cap at $2 million for this second draw. And you compute it the same way you did the first PPP. The good news is that in this case, if you use the exact same computation that you used for PPP1 and you come to the same lender that provided you PPP1, then you won't need to provide the documentation because we'll already have it. Now, there were certain improvements made to the program for businesses that have a NAICS code of 72, beginning with 72, and those are principally in the accommodation or hotel motel industry and food services, recognizing the severity of the impact that this pandemic has caused on their business, and they will allow you to utilize 3.5 times the average monthly payroll costs, same conditions, 2019 or 2020. Let me cover what some of the new covered expenditures are. The first one is covered supplier goods, and those are for goods that are essential to a business's operation and made pursuant to a contract or a purchase order that was in effect before the PPP second draw loan was funded. There is an exception in that perishable goods do not need to be tied to a contract nor a purchase order. They've also added a covered worker protection component, and that is if you've had to make changes, and what business hasn't, but if you've made changes in order to adapt and comply with Health and Human Services, the CDC, OSHA, your state or local government requirements, those expenses are also covered and both allowable and forgivable. Some of these could be physical barriers, those sneeze guards, air filtration systems, drive-through windows. If you expanded your outdoor seating in order to accommodate, even if you may have to make some changes to your indoor seating as well, on-site and off-site health screening. Also, there are covered operations expenditures, and these principally have to do with business software. As you know, many businesses have had to change, excuse me, have had to change how they do business, and much of that is now having to do with software or cloud computing, whether it's for your operation itself, for a product, for your processing of payroll expenses, human resources, almost any business software expenditure that you've incurred as a result of complying with the requirements or adapting your business to dealing in this environment would be part of those covered operations expenditures. And then finally, covered property damage costs, and those have to deal with expenditures that are related to property damage, vandalism, looting that were caused by disturbances that occurred in 2020 and that are not covered or reimbursable by your insurance or any other program. So as long as you've had to pay for it and you're not going to be reimbursed in any way for those costs, you will be allowed to use them as allowable and forgivable expenses. You may remember this page from prior presentations. It's what's allowable and what's forgivable. In the allowable and forgivable, they clarified that in the group health benefits, group life, disability, vision, and dental are included. And as I just described them, you'll find that on the non-payroll costs, they've expanded it to the four new areas that I described briefly. What they have not changed is that the expectation is that 60% of all forgivable expenditures must be in payroll costs. So very important that at least 60%. That doesn't mean that if you can use all your monies at 100%, that you can't. You certainly can, but no less than 60%, or your forgiveness will be adjusted such that whatever amount is forgiven will represent 60% of your payroll costs. I also caution and alert you to the owner compensation limitations, which are still true in the PPP second draw, and that those compensation caps were based on prorated amounts, whether you use the 8-week or the 24-week. Well, you'll have to make that same proration if, for example, you decide that you're going to use a 14-week covered period. But this is a very important piece because they didn't want to create a windfall for owners' compensation in these cases. And then finally, also a reminder that your covered contracts, and those are your mortgages, your leases, any utilities contracts, maybe for internet services, must have been entered into prior to February 15, 2020. This is exactly the same as for the original PPP. Let's talk about documentation because they've made some improvements here. In the area of payroll costs, I'm reminding you that if you use the same period for PPP in phase 1 and you're using the same lender, then no new documentation to support your payroll costs is going to be necessary. Now, when you apply, if you demonstrate and show us that you're using the same period, then what we will do at First National is review the documentation we have, and I'm sure that it'll be sufficient. And if it is, we'll use that. If there's any need for any additional information, we'll certainly reach out through our first responders and let you know. But this will make applying for PPP second draw a little easier. Also, in the area of demonstrating a decline in revenues for loans under $150,000, you won't need to provide any documentation at the time of your application. You will, though, be required when applying for forgiveness to provide that documentation. And that documentation is typically going to come from annual or quarterly financials, tax returns, bank statements, depending on your business and your circumstances. And it'll either be on an accrual or a cash basis, depending on the accounting methodology that you normally use in your business. And of course, here again, just like for PPP1, you're going to have to show that you were in business as of February 15, 2020. So how are you going to be able to apply? Well, you're going to be able to apply electronically through the First National Bank of South Miami website. We will be sending you a notice very shortly, as soon as all of the processes have been developed, and we will continue to apprise you. We expect some good progress today, if not completed by today. But in any event, for PPP1, you can start applying as early as today. For PPP second draw, we expect that it'll be tomorrow or Wednesday, and then we will move expeditiously to submit it to the SBA and secure your dollars. So these are a couple of things that we learned from PPP1 and wanted to share them with you. We've chosen to work directly with our clients and assist them in every way possible. And therefore, we did not use any agents or brokers during phase one. And we don't believe that we need to use any agents or brokers for PPP second draw. But if you choose to use an agent or a broker, you may do so. Of course, there's no prohibition against it. The prohibition is that you cannot use PPP dollars to pay that agent fee. And First National Bank of South Miami will not be responsible for the payment of that agent fee. That will strictly be between you and them if you so choose. Third, we also always encourage our borrowers to reach out to their accountants or lawyers for any specific tax advice or questions specifically about their business and their qualification for PPP and PPP second draw. We've worked very, very closely with many of our clients, one-on-one even. But at the end of the day, your accountant and your lawyers are the ones that you should look to for any specific advice on how it relates to you and your business. So let me share with you a few other components of PPP second draw. I mentioned earlier that borrowers may now elect between an 8 and a 24-week covered period anytime in between those dates. I mentioned that there was a simplified process for PPP loans up to $150,000, and that will be the same process for PPP second draw loans up to $150,000. You may remember that we sent out numerous emails saying, hey, we expect that there's going to be blanket forgiveness. And while we didn't exactly get blanket forgiveness, I think this is as close as you can get to blanket forgiveness. And the SBA will be putting out a one-page application for PPP loans under 150, at 150 or less, that asks 3 questions. Number 1, describe the number of employees that you were able to retain as a result of PPP. Simple. Number 2, the amount of PPP funds that you spent on payroll costs. Simple. And the PPP loan amount. So those 3 very simple questions are all that's needed for forgiveness of loans up to $150,000. As a borrower, you are going to have to make an attestation that all of the information, including the certification, is true and correct. So help me God. And that you've complied with all applicable PPP requirements. There's some more good news. First, the idle advance reduction was eliminated from the forgiveness. Some of our clients that have already applied for forgiveness that had an idle advance saw that they had a reduction in the payment to the bank as a result of their idle advance. Well, Congress said that was not our intention. And if you got an idle loan, good for you. And if you got PPP and you met all the criteria, good for you. So there was no double dipping, which was the term that we were using back then. So those clients that already applied for and had the idle advance reduced, the SBA is going to be paying off that remaining balance on your loan. The other piece of very good news, actually, is that those borrowers that use their PPP dollars for payroll expenses, rent, utilities, etc., you're going to still be able to reduce them from your expenses when filing your tax returns. And that's good news, because you're not going to have to take the forgiveness amount into income, but you're going to be able to still reduce those expenses. So that those 2 pieces of news are very good. This one is not so good, but you have to know that if you've already submitted your forgiveness application, you are prohibited from reapplying for PPP's forgiveness with expanded allowable uses. Now, while I have a sad face on there, virtually all of our clients that applied for forgiveness received 100% forgiveness, except for any of those that got the EIDL advances, but those dollars will be coming shortly. And finally, it does allow for all borrowers that returned all or part of their PPP monies to reapply up to the maximum amount of the PPP loan, and it does open up your allowable forgivable expenses to all of the ones that I've mentioned in this presentation. So I mentioned earlier about the shuttered venue, and almost none of you are probably in this category, but you may know someone that could be, and this could be very, very good for those businesses. And who qualifies? Live venue operator, theatrical producer, a talent representative, a museum operator, the zoo. Exclusions are public companies or any entity that receives more than 10% of their gross revenue from federal federal funds. It requires that the business had been operational as of February 29th and saw at least a 25% reduction in revenue, Q blank 2020 versus Q blank 2019. And of course, that as of the date of the grant, the business must be open or intend to reopen. And this grant could be as much as 45% of the gross revenue earned by that entity in 2019. And they may even qualify for a second grant up to 50% of the amount of the first grant. So in theory, you could get 67.5% of 2019 revenues in the form of a grant. There is some priority period. So during the first 14 days of the program, they will prioritize it for businesses that have sustained a 90% reduction in revenue between April 1st and December 31st as compared to 2019. And then the second 14 days for those businesses that sustained a 70% reduction in revenues. And I suspect that this has a lot to do with a lot of the New York theaters and things like that. So really helpful for them and their people. So that's it at this time. That'll give you a reasonable idea of where we are. And I'll turn this now back over to Veronica for questions and answers.
Well, thank you, Angel. That was a lot of information. And we have, I think, a record-breaking question set on here. So we already are up to 24 questions. So certainly you have sparked the intrigue of many. And this is a lot of important differences that hugely benefit our small business owners. So clearly they would like to have clarity and understanding. So first, I'm going to start with a thank you to the team for setting this up. And for forgiveness, can we use funds on inventory and other areas now that they've included this note expenditures to suppliers that are essential at the time of purchase to the recipient's current operations?
So it appears that under the under one of those categories that you would be able to do that, especially if this inventory could be perishable, right? So you're operating a restaurant or something like that. You ordered a truckload of beef, and you weren't able to use it, or only were able to use some of it. So I would say yes, that can be part of it.
Okay. Angel, you can remove your slide, I think. Our next question from Anonymous, I hope. We deferred payroll for management for a period of time. The amount posted in our financial statements, the balance sheet, but was not paid in the 12-month period, will be using the 2019 calendar. And therefore, not on our tax return. Can we include this amount, or can we only submit payroll and payroll taxes that hit our tax return?
So it has to hit your tax return, right? Now, I assume you're talking about 2020. And if you're talking about 2020, you've done your taxes already. That's pretty quick.
No, they're talking about 2019, Angel.
2019.
I guess they have financial statements to show that, but they never paid it. So the taxes for 2019 were filed, but those expenses weren't actually paid.
No, so if they weren't paid, and they don't show up in the tax return, you cannot use them.
Okay.
The government has really focused on their reporting, tax reporting, whether it's sales tax reporting or payroll tax reporting or income taxes, to kind of validate the numbers. So if it wasn't reported in the tax returns, I don't believe that you can use it.
The SBA has noted that submissions can be done as of this morning at 9 a.m. There's apparently an order in which institutions can submit on behalf of their clients. Is First National Bank able to submit today? So yes, there is a community bank. What happened in the first round, as many of you will recall, the money was gone in a very short period of time, in days. And who was left out were community banks, because the very large institutions had automated systems for submitting the payrolls, and we are doing it manually. We have people reviewing everything and submitting everything. And so obviously we don't have millions of dollars to spend on these systems that were uploading 1,000 at a time. We were uploading one at a time. So what they did when more funds became available is they gave a window to community banks for which in which to for us to submit on behalf of our small businesses. Clearly, small community banks are the ones who service about 80% of the small businesses. So Washington saw that this was unfair. SBA saw that this was unfair to the vast majority of small businesses. So they have allowed a window for community banks again. And Angel, I think it's 48 hours. And this is what I was stating last night. So they make the announcement at 1:45. They notify the banks on Friday afternoon that the window is going to open today. But until almost midnight last night, the actual application SD was not available. So it is now available, and we are working diligently to have it available on our portal. So as of this minute, and this is changing minute by minute, we do not have the SD application available on our portal. But as Angel said earlier in the presentation, we anticipate to have that up by today. What we will do, and a couple of you have asked on here, we will notify you the same way that I have been sending you these updates on the webinars. When the portal is available with the SD application, then we'll send out an email to make you aware, so you don't have to be checking our portal every half hour like we're checking the SBA portal. You'll be able to know that we'll send you an email indicating that the portal is up and updated with the SD application. That being said, if you never got the first PP and you're applying for PPP, that is already available. Is that correct, Angel?
Yes, that's correct. And I just want to point out that what the SBA has opened up today is for PPP. It's not until this Wednesday that they will open it up for PPP second draw. So just to be clear, so if you're applying for PPP, you can apply through our website for PPP, but if you're applying for PPP second draw, that's what's not available yet, and that isn't opened up through the SBA portal either. I will tell you this: the application itself for second draw, it has a minimal amount of questions, and it really centers around the average monthly payroll. It has a bunch of certifications and things like that you're going to have to answer, but minimal amount of legwork is going to be required. And if you can leverage off of your PPP original one, it's going to be very easy for you to apply for the second draw.
Thank you. Will the calculation be, again, based on 2019 payroll, or can it be based on 2020 payroll?
It can be based on 2020 payroll. That is allowed. It's the last 12 months, which is for all intended purposes calendar year 2020, or you can use 2019. Again, if you use 2019 and you used it for your original PPP, it's going to be easier.
Okay. Is there any reason why a company would not use the 24 weeks for the forgiveness period?
So you've spent the money properly, you've used the money. and you just want to put it behind you. So no, there's no reason, because it just gives you even more expenses that you can include as allowable and forgivable, except you will have to do the computations of total FTEs and any potential reduction. So if you've had some variance that occurred in there, you've let some people go, etc. It may make it more of a challenge.
Mhm. And like you said, I mean, the ones that we know that had applied earlier, just not wanting to wait for the 24 weeks, like Angel said, it's just they wanted to get it behind them. A couple of them were anticipating selling their business, and some of them were anticipating bringing on new debt. They were getting a loan. So there were just factors like that, and they spent it all, and they were able to not let anyone go, and they were able to spend it all in 12 weeks for everything that they needed to. So some people wanted to get it off their books prior to the end of year, so they were anxious. So there's different reasons, but typically it's for a compelling reason. We were encouraging you, even from the forgiveness webinars a couple of months ago, to wait, because we were hoping for this simplification of forgiveness. We were actually hoping for a blanket forgiveness, which that didn't come. But the simplification, as Angel went through, certainly makes it a lot easier to qualify and apply for forgiveness. Is there okay? Good morning. The majority of our work is for cruise lines. Would that be considered a shuttered venue?
No, unfortunately not, and I completely empathize with you and understand it. But no, it isn't. It's really, the shuttered venue is really more about theaters and museums and zoos and things like that.
Okay. What will the term of the PPP2 loan be? 2 years or 5 years?
It's 5 years. It's 5 years at 1%. Now, obviously, people are probably not going to take it for 5 years, because the expectation is that you apply for it, you get it, you spend it on the allowable expenses, and you apply for forgiveness as soon as possible, right? And that's what we would encourage you to do, because with Washington, you never know how things change from one day to the next. It's just like once the forgiveness application for those loans under 150,000 is made available, which we expect will be sometime next week, we would encourage you to apply as quickly as possible and ensure that you got your forgiveness and move on to the second draw.
Okay. Speaking of that, I just applied for forgiveness with FNBSM. I think you mentioned that I cannot apply for the second draw. Can I cancel the application that I just signed on January 10th?
No, maybe you misunderstood what I said. Um, and I can understand that, because it's hard sometimes, unless you've been reading this thing forever and have read it 10 times over, that this is really talking about two programs, PPP and PPP second draw. When I said that you could not reapply for PPP if you've already been forgiven, is PPP, not PPP second draw. You can, in fact, apply for PPP second draw if you have either applied already for forgiveness, or are applying, or even received forgiveness.
Thank you for that clarification. I know that it was a point of confusion even with our officers here. Suffered a 25% reduction. Can it be only one quarter where you're more than 25% decreased in sales?
Yes.
Okay. If you originally received an idle loan and PPP, can you still apply for PPP too?
Yes.
Now, one of the things I heard you say, going back to the forgiveness, if they applied for PPP and they had not included the idle because that was the rule at the time. They can't go back and get the idle now, correct?
I think they can go back to the SBA and apply for idle, because that's why the SBA funded about $20 billion into idle. But it would be a new application.
Okay. To what extent can we include the rents in the second draw, PP2?
It's part of it. All of the expenses that were part of PPP1 carry over into PPP second draw and got expanded. And by the way, those expanded also apply to PPP. So it's as if that whole universe of payroll costs and non-payroll costs were there since day one. Does that make sense?
Yep, sure does. You indicate that amount to be borrowed in is either 2 times or 3.5 times monthly payroll costs for 2019 or 2020 at borrower's choice, whichever is lower. 2020 is lower for most businesses. It seems counterintuitive, but I think you were comparing it to 2 million, not.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. I either may have said it wrong, and I apologize, or I wrote it wrong, but the test is 2 tests. $2 million, that's the maximum you're going to get regardless. Or 2.5 times the average monthly payroll for either 2019 or 2020 at your selection.
Okay. Understood. If at least 60% of all forgivable costs are payroll costs, then will 100% of the loan be forgiven?
Yes.
That's
As
the
long
rule.
as long as all of the submitted expenses are within the allowable forgivable categories. Yes.
At the beginning, I thought I heard you say you cannot get PPP2 if your PPP1 was already forgiven. Is that true? So no, and he's already answered that. That is not true. You just have to attest to that you're going to either you have used or you're going to be used all of the PPP1 as indicated. But you don't have to have gotten or applied for forgiveness yet. Are there any differences between 1 and 2 for sole proprietors, single member LLCs? Did the rules change for, what
No.
is the difference between PPP1 or the second draw? Is there anything different for sole proprietors?
No, it's the same. It's the same criteria, right? You have to show that your revenues were reduced by 25% during a particular quarter, and you can get another 2.5 times your payroll costs.
So if a company didn't start until February 2020, how can we determine comparable reduction of income with the previous year?
Okay, so when did you start in February 2020? If you started after February 15th, you're ineligible. If you started before February 15th, then you are technically eligible. And there's a whole section that describes how you would compute the payroll costs. But I chose not to go into that level of detail here because most of our business, that wouldn't apply to most of our businesses. But I can certainly find for you, if you want to reach out, I can certainly find for you the section and send it to you to show you how it is you would compute that. But there's a specific computation for that.
Okay. If we've not requested forgiveness for PPP1 yet and are planning on applying for the second draw, should we wait to forgive both loans at the same time? Or should we apply for forgiveness for one prior to applying? You don't have to apply for forgiveness for one prior to applying for two. But what do you think, Angel, about applying for forgiveness at the same time?
I would treat the two separate. I would, if I've already spent, and I have to have already spent my dollars in order to get PPP2. So if you've spent them, you expect to get 100% forgiveness, go ahead and apply, get it behind you, and then we'll apply again. It's going to be two different applications anyway. So these are two different loans. So I would encourage you to apply for forgiveness for one, and then when you've used the funds you've gotten and have used the funds for two, apply for forgiveness then.
Yeah, I think it's cleaner that way for sure. Does this mean that idle advances grants from PPP1 don't need to be repaid?
So yes, that's what it means, right?
But you have to apply for the forgiveness. You can't just ignore the bill. You have to
right,
go through the process of applying for.
right. So what was happening is you were applying for your PPP. You were either listing or you weren't listing on your forgiveness that you had received an idle grant, and the SBA was sending us the forgiveness dollars less the idle grant. This act eliminated that and said, no, SBA, we want you to pay off the whole loan and give them that grant as well, so they can have both those dollars.
We have planned to add health benefits in 2021 that were not in place in 19 or 20. Would those costs be forgivable and the second draw?
I'm going to react and say yes, because they're now allowable, forgivable expenses that are either incurred or paid during the new covered period. You can't go back to PPP1 because that's a different covered period. But for PPP second draw, you would be able to make those, be forgiven for those expenses.
Okay. If a company receives two PPP loans, should a forgiveness application be submitted for each loan? So Angel has answered that, and the answer is yes, keep them separate. Would it be a separate portion of the application form where you can specify all other allowed expenses, utilities, rent, and so forth on the current PPP2 form from the SBA website? I do not see that option, just an average monthly payroll field.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
the application,
I got lost on that question.
I think the question is, I don't see where I'm requesting rent, utilities, because your request is only for 2.5 times your payroll. So that's all you're applying for. You're not applying for all the extras. All of those extras are what's part of what will be forgiven. So let's say only 60% you've spent on payroll. That's where the extras come in. So you can't apply for all your payroll plus all of these expenses. Those are the cushioning that they're providing for you, because initially the PPP was only supposed to be for payroll. You weren't allowed to have all of these other things because it was really to preserve the payroll to keep people employed. So if you go back to the initial intent of what PPP was for, what they were trying to do is avoid companies laying off people. Again, this was supposed to be a 6, 8, 12-week pandemic, and then we were going to be better, and it didn't happen that way. So that's why they were asking you, keep your people employed, keep paying them, don't lay them off just because you're hitting a rough patch. Well, the rough patch is now 10 months later. So would it be a separate portion of the app? Okay, so we've answered that. Could you repeat the 25% reduction on sales? Explain
Yes.
that.
So what they're asking you to do is compare one quarter in 2020 against the same quarter in 2019. And what they're looking for is a reduction. So if you spent $100,000, or if you had revenues of $100,000 in the first quarter of 2019 and 75,000 or less in that same quarter 2020, you would qualify. It's as simple as that. Now, because of documentation, etc., they've also allowed that if you want, and it's easier for you, and you say, well, in the whole year 2020, my revenues were $750,000 or less against my whole year in 2019, which was $1 million or more, I qualify that way as well. But it's really a quarter to quarter comparison. And there's a long, very descriptive list of what qualifies as gross revenues, and there's things that are excluded, such as, for example, if you're in the advertising business and your client pays through you the value of the advertising, well, clearly that's not revenues to you. That's just simply a pass through to the media that's putting those ads out, right? So those type of things are excluded from revenue, and you would just look to your agency fee or your broker fee, et cetera, for those calculations. But we can certainly provide you information on what constitutes gross receipts.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 11 o'clock, so we are going to take time for just a few more questions. But some of you have asked, we are recording this webinar, and as of tomorrow, it will be on our website. We have our PPP Resource Center on our website, and the recording of this webinar will be there for you to review and also for you to share with other people. We are not sending out the slides, but of course, by looking at the webinar, you will see the slide deck as Angel goes through and explains the slides. So there was a few questions in that regard. So, Angel, some people never were able to use PPP 1 because their business, they couldn't reopen, and now they're looking at reopening. So here is a question. Someone, aside from thanking you for your hard work, they plan on returning the proceeds from PPP 1, and in exchange, they want to apply for the second draw and will be using the same payroll. Is that an easy thing to do? What's realistic? They would just return the funds and then apply new?
You'd apply new, but you wouldn't apply for a PPP second draw. You'd return the funds and apply for PPP. Or reapply for PPP, right?
So John, just ring us up or send an email if you still want to discuss that further. Should the amount of, because there's another person on this webinar who I believe will have the same question as the one that you just posed, because they happen to be in the same line of business and I think are in the same position. Should the amount of PPP 1 and 2 exceed the $150,000 loan forgiveness amount in total, will we be able to use the simplified forgiveness form?
Separate. PPP 1 has its own forgiveness. PPP second draw has its own forgiveness. So in theory, it could be blanket forgiveness of as much as $300,000.
Okay. All righty. Just to be clear, if we apply for the second draw and we want to apply the same amount as PPP 1, bearing in mind that we have to meet the 25% reduction, we don't have to supply any additional documents? What if we need less than the original loan?
So
Let's say they applied for,
I don't know why you'd apply for less, right? I mean, if it's there, if it's available, if you qualify, if you can spend it, You take
Well,
it.
maybe their payroll is less. Maybe they used to have 100 employees and now they have 80 employees. So maybe their second loan would be less because their payroll is less.
If you're going to use the same period and we already have that information, you don't need to resubmit the documentation that you already submitted.
Okay. So your Sandra is asking about the simplified forms. We don't have that yet. The SBA has until the 20th of the month, so they still have another 9 days to provide those. So the banks do not have those available yet. Again, we'll notify you on an email. There's just a lot, and we knew this in the first round of PPP. Things were changing often, and typically for the benefit of the borrowers and the benefit of the small businesses. So I'm going to give you one final question. Is there any, and it's from our friend CPA, is there any expectation of the original PPP loans under 150 to have a simplified application that will be issued by the SBA, similar to the second PPP application? So there is, the forgiveness application is simplified, and that is not going to be available until the 20th. So it is a simplified application under $150,000. I believe that was your question. Okay, so one more. If you submitted your loan forgiveness on the first round and the loan is forgiven, are you still able to deduct the expenses you used the PPP funds on?
Yes.
Okay. Well, there are still, we could do this, Angel. I'll do a few more questions, and anyone who wants to stay on, we'll do a few more if you're willing, Angel.
Sure, of course.
Okay. Well, I only paid you for 1 hour. I just wanted to make sure that, you weren't going to quit on us. Okay, what is the process to apply for a grant? My talent management company took a hit this year.
I don't know. That's my
not our
simple
area.
answer. Correct, because the grant would not be through. My understanding is that the grant is not through financial institutions. The loans are. I would think that it's through the SBA, but I have not heard from the SBA yet in terms of having a webinar or having meetings to describe how they're applying for any of that. But it is something that I have on my list of things that I need to try to address for our clients.
And again, as we continually state, you really should be, we're doing the best we can to interpret and provide the information for our clients. But, more detailed client questions should really go to your professional advisors, your lawyers, and your accountants and your tax attorneys. Hey, so here's my other restaurateur, and that I mentioned earlier would probably have similar question to John. I did not use any of the money in the first PPP because we didn't open until now. Can I use the PPP money now? And Chris, if you already opened and you didn't tell me, I'm going to be a real sad girl. So you better send me an email separately on that, because have always been one of my favorite restaurants. But Angel, I think what I understood you to tell John, he should probably return the PPP-1 funds and then apply new for PPP-2 this is a restaurant and they never opened. So they didn't use their PPP-1. So he wants to know, can I use the PPP-1 now? Or would you say it'd be better for him to return PPP-1 and apply anew?
So you have to return it, right? And here's the reason why. Because the period that you can use those monies within is called the covered period. And for both PPP-1, for PPP second draw, for the new PPP, the covered period begins the day the loan is funded. There's no way that anyone that got money for PPP-1 in April or May of last year, even June of last year, the 24 weeks, which is the maximum, is already gone. And so, you now have no payroll unless you've been paying your people. You now have no payroll to populate forgiveness for that loan. Therefore, the best thing to do is return the money, clear that, reapply. Now you've reset the covered period clock when you get your new PPP dollars.
Okay, Angel, so here's one, and we kind of touched on it earlier with maybe someone having a reduced payroll. You said that the option, we could use the 2019 payroll or the 2020. What if the 2020 payroll is lower because of layoffs? Can you still use the 2019 payroll for the second draw?
Yeah.
But you're going to
It's
still
your
have to
option.
have paid it.
Right. You still
have to use 60% of it on payroll.
Right.
And you still have to have the number of staff members to qualify for it, correct?
Right. Right.
Like you can't go from 100 employees and you would have qualified for, for $500,000, and now you have 50 employees. It'd be real difficult to be able to justify, if you have half the number of employees, to still have 60% of that, unless everyone got really big raises, I guess. But you'd still have to have, if you had 100 employees, you still have to have a certain number of employees in order to get that. It's not only the 60% of dollars, there's also a number of employees you still have to have employed. No?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Did not apply for forgiveness yet. When can we apply for the second draw? Can we apply directly through? So we've answered this. You didn't have to have applied for forgiveness yet. You just have to attest that you will qualify for the forgiveness before you apply. And the second draw application should be available beginning Wednesday. That's what the SBA tells us. Would getting a line of credit or term loan now affect the PPP second draw application?
No.
Okay. Because one of the attestations you make is that you're getting this because you don't have another form of financing available. I think that's why the client is asking.
Yeah, because the economic hardship, etc. There's look, my opinion is no, that I don't think that that has a big bearing. There is a questionnaire for those businesses that got over $2 million in PPP1, the loan necessity questionnaire, that does ask those questions. But if you're not in that category, where it's over $2 million, I don't think that getting a line of credit or a term loan to help your business is going to impact your being able to demonstrate a need.
But you probably would want to talk with your accountant about that.
Yeah.
Can you use PPP2 funds retroactively, meaning to cover payroll and other allowable expenses as of the time the funds of the original PPP? So they want to, okay, and I'm guessing no, it's got to be from now forward, because again, they're trying to get you to keep people paid going forward. So you can't go back and say, yeah, but I paid them, 4 months ago.
Because of the covered period, right? Your expenses are incurred or paid during the covered period, and the covered period doesn't begin until the loan is funded.
So along the same lines, can I include an employee in the calculation to recoup payroll costs despite having to let them go recently? And I'd say no, because it's from this period forward is your covered period. Afraid not. Do you know if there's an idle round 2 as well, Angel, as part of this?
I don't know, but I suspect there is, only because of the $20 billion funding that the SBA was given as a result of the act. So I assume there would be.
So what if your business is open, but you're not able to write checks for payroll due to decline in business? Can you still apply for the loan?
If you're not going to be able to pay payroll, you're not going to be forgiven.
Just to clarify, if I still have not applied for forgiveness of PPP and won't do so until January 20th, when can we apply? So as long as you know, Pat, that you're going to qualify, even though you haven't applied, then you can still apply, and you can apply with us starting Wednesday. Yes, you're correct, Pat. Okay, we are a private for-profit supplier of souvenirs to the tourist sector. Do we qualify for the expanded benefits? We are not a government entity or nonprofit.
For which expanded benefits? The covered expenditures? Yes, right? I mean, everybody does that. That's for all businesses.
Again, we are a tourist gift shop supplier. We bought inventory before the pandemic started based on orders from customers, received the inventory from Asia, but the customers have canceled the orders or they've closed down. We cannot sell the inventory to other customers as it's customer specific product. Can we claim this as lost inventory?
Yes.
Okay. On the tax return, how do you account for the expenses paid by the PPP loan? I think they need to consult with their accountant or.
Yeah, but those are payroll costs, rent, you know, these are expenses that are normal expenses that you would otherwise have used to reduce your revenues, right? You've got your revenues and then your cost of doing business, your operating expenses, and that's where they would fall in. What had happened before is that the IRS was saying, oh no, don't mess with my income. If you got the PPP dollars and that's what you use to pay for those expenses, we're not going to let you deduct them. And then Congress came back and said, no, you're wrong. They can deduct them also.
If we use the comparable covered period average payroll in 2019 for our loan amount, do we need to submit calendar 2019 average payroll for this loan? Or can we use what was, and you can use what was previously submitted. You don't have to submit the same documentation, correct, Angel?
Yes, correct. Unless you're changing it.
Yeah.
You're changing it. You're not going to use 2019. You want to use 2020 now. Then you are going to have to submit the information for 2020.
Right. So someone who came in late asking if we're going to email the information, no, the webinar will be available on our portal starting tomorrow. What is the process for applying for PPP-1 simplified? So we don't have that form yet. We don't know precisely, and the SBA is supposed to release that by January 20th. So stay tuned. And can you apply for the EIDL grant with FNBSM? No, we don't do that. We're only doing PPP. It's not us. That's not what banks are doing. Banks are doing the PPP.
That would be directly with the SBA.
So you can consult their website. Please confirm that entities that received a PPP-1 will receive an email from the bank when we can start the SD application. So we will be notifying you when the SD application is available. Again, we don't anticipate that to be available until Wednesday in accordance to what we have heard from the SBA. But yes, you will get an email that it's available. Are the limits on CEO owner salary the same for the second draw? Please, can you let us know again the limits for both 8 and 24 weeks on the salary?
Yes, the limits are the same. Just contact your first responder, and I'll send them the schedule that we put out on the proration. Right. The only caveat to that is if you use a period that is neither 8-week nor 24, but something in between, that computation is going to be slightly different.
Okay. Are the revenues net or gross?
Revenues are gross.
Okay. Can we use our 1099 from 2019 compared to 2020 licensed sole proprietor to show loss.
Yes.
Okay. As a business with residual income, do we only calculate new sales? I'm not
No,
sure.
revenues is revenues, right? I mean, even if it's recurring revenue, it's still revenue. And the revenue bucket would include recurring revenue.
Okay. Yes, we did answer your question, Chris, so we got that one done. So to apply for PPP2, there is no need to show reduction of income per quarter on the application.
Well, specifically, the application does require it does require you to show and say, for example, in 2020, second quarter of 2020, my gross receipts were 750,000. In the second quarter of 2019, my gross receipts was 1.1 million. Therefore, I'm showing that there was a 25% reduction. What I said is that if your loan amount is under $150,000, you're not going to have to show proof of that reduction until you apply for forgiveness. If your loan amount is over $150,000, you have to show proof of it with your PPP second draw application.
Okay. So to apply for PPP2, there's no need to show reduction of income per quarter on the application. That is a question from Meredith.
No, I think I said you do have to show it, right? You do have to show.
In other words, if the
which
business
quarters.
is doing better and your business has grown, God bless you, that's wonderful. But this program, the second draw, is for the businesses that have continued to have less sales or less revenues than they did prior to the pandemic. But if you're doing better, then that's not what this program is for.
And by the way, that only applies to one quarter. So in theory, you could, let's look back at history. So in 2020, during the first quarter, you might have been impacted a little bit sometime in the last couple of weeks of March, right? So let's just say that in the first quarter, you were even. In the second quarter, you had a reduction of more than 25%. But then in the third and the fourth quarter, because of the way you're doing business, your business thrived. You still have that second quarter where you're demonstrating a reduction of 25%, and therefore you would qualify.
So this one, my daughter opened her business prior to February 15th last year, but didn't secure a location until March. She hasn't paid herself or anyone else payroll. Would she be able to apply for the PPP loan?
No, you have to be able to demonstrate that you were actually operating on February 15th, 2020. And how you demonstrate that when you are a business that hires people or that has other people, you're going to demonstrate it through your payroll taxes, right? Or your payroll filings or your payroll reports. Hey, I was paying all these people already. If you're an individual, then you would show it by receipts. Hey, look, I wasn't paying myself because there wasn't any money to pay myself. I had already started the business, and look, here are some invoices that I sent out to my clients on February 10th, on February 12th, on February 14th. Therefore, by virtue of that, you can see that they actually had already started their business in February.
Okay. This is going to be it because I have an audit meeting now. So, okay, I got on my original PPP, I only submitted for payroll and payroll forgiveness. Can I now on the second draw submit for payroll as well as expenses, rent, etc.?
Yeah, again, it's a different loan, right? It's a different loan. It's a different covered period. Can't use the same expenses because it's those expenses with this new covered period. But yeah, I mean, 60% is the requirement for you to get full forgiveness, right? 60% must go towards payroll.
Okay, Anonymous asked, what is an EIDL, EIDL? So go on to the Small Business Administration website. It is not something you secure through us. That's directly with the SBA. And
And
on
it's an
the,
acronym for Economic Injury Disaster Loan, if you want to look it up. If it's easier to look it up that way, but EIDL is a very common acronym for it.
acronym. Okay, last one. I'm a realtor. It's been a very hard time in the last year for my kids in the homeschooled. Can I apply for PPP as a realtor?
Yeah, you're an independent contractor, right?
Okay. Well, Angel, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. And gosh, we appreciate our customers so very much. And we appreciate your time and your attention today. We're always just an email or a phone call away. Our PPP Resource Center is up there and it has a variety of references for you. And tomorrow, this webinar, recorded webinar, will be available for you to view and to share with other people. Thank you so much, Angel. I think you provide a lot of knowledge and comfort to people through these trying times. Patrick, thank you for being there, and thank you for keeping all of our lenders in line and working well for our clients. This is Veronica Birch Flores signing off from WFNBSM. Thank you for your loyalty. Thank you for your friendship. Have a great day.